I am so glad to have my first conversation and to have my friend Yasmin here. She has some amazing stories to tell. And as I listened to her share, I said, oh, it would be so good for others to hear this. I met Yasmin 4.5 years ago. She's in an online community of practice that I facilitate. And though we lived on opposite sides of the world, we've had the privilege of being in the same house for a week, hearing just amazing stories. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me here in your house and that this opportunity came up for us to have this conversation. I'm really happy about this.
Me too. So you have just a glow about you and joy and peace that's tangible. I felt it whenever we were on the screen, but even more so now that we're in person. And you have a lot to share about experiencing darkness and light and the light of Jesus Christ.
Yes. Yeah.
So I thought maybe you could tell us about your experience back in kindergarten.
Yeah. I came from a non-religious household. So I wasn't brought up as a Christian. And my first contact with the Christian faith was in kindergarten because my parents would send me to a Christian kindergarten, not for a particular reason, just because it was very close. And yeah, I found myself there as a 4-year-old, very new. I was very socially awkward, shy. And I remember how overwhelming it all felt, all kids running and lots of commotion, shrieks and laughter. And I kind of perched on a windowsill in the background and observing everything from the distance. And then what stood out to me was that we were read after lunch stories from the children's Bible. So the kindergarten teacher would read stories from the Bible. And that was the first time I was ever exposed to the Bible and to who God was. And I remember especially the miracles that were told about, for example, Exodus, like this incredible being called God who did amazing things and got the Israelites out of Egypt, and walls of water with the parting of the Red Sea. And I was just in awe. I was impressed. And then after that, we would go to a service next door. There was a church attached, and they had special services for the children each Friday. And when I was there, the kindergarten teacher whispered into my ear, Yasmin, do you want to bring the offering up the altar this time? So they were having this thing where we were collecting money from our parents for a donation for our poor children. And one kid was picked each time to bring up the offering. So yeah, I stood up. I remember how quiet it was. I remember the dim light of the church, and I could hear my own steps. And even though it was a new environment, I felt oddly familiar and cozy and at peace. And then I was climbing up the stairs leading up to the altar. I remember the voice of the pastor. He was like standing next to me and kind of admonishing me to shh, be quiet. But it turned out it wasn't even necessary because I felt like, yeah, I was standing on sacred ground. I mean, not that I had this as a concept, but there was something in me that was in awe and had a sense of a being there, a sense of a presence on the altar or at the altar. So it was a really tender moment when I laid down the offering, and I really had this clear sense of being smiled at and welcomed. And it was just a sense of warmth entering my chest and yeah, feeling so loved in that moment. And something just lit up in me from then on. And so when I went back home in my room, I piled up my play mats, like I built a little tower.
Oh,
And then I climbed on top and knelt down and I started a conversation with God.
wow.
Yeah. So I just bared myself to him and shared about me and my life.
Oh.
And again, I had this felt sense in my body of just being loved and welcomed, and that I could feel his delight. It's not that I heard a voice, but I was just so sure he was there and listening to me. And then yeah, from then on, I believed. I was completely convinced that there was a God and that it was the most important thing in life to have a relationship with him.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was really special. That was
Yeah.
my first encounter.
Oh.
And yeah, and it really planted a seed which would become very important later in my life.
Mm. Mm. I love how you took what was important and you made it your own in your own bedroom, in your own
Yeah,
space. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, and
yeah.
that felt sense
Yes.
in the warmth, and it was a
Yeah,
body sensation of feeling
it
seen and
was
loved, and
absolutely.
yeah.
And it was something that caused me to pursue it from then onwards. Like
Mm,
that was the one thing that I was after then in the years that ensued when I was searching for
mm,
that actually, but I couldn't always name it because as I didn't grow up in a Christian context, after kindergarten, I didn't continue in Christian contexts, but
mm,
I was spiritual and I was believing in God, but I didn't know who he was through Jesus Christ. That's the
mm,
thing. So yeah, that meant that unfortunately in my case, I was misled into a path, or in many paths actually, that led away from him rather than to him.
mm. Wow.
Mhm.
So what was that like? What did that feel like? And what do you
Mhm.
remember? Like what things stood out to you?
Well, what stood out to me was, well, first of all, as I brought some childhood wounds with me, as many of us do, there was a sense of um, loneliness and an
Mm,
insecurity about who I was, who my identity is, or what my identity is. And that kind of also determined my search. I wanted to feel approval and confirmation from the things I was looking into, and even a sense of specialness, if you like.
mm. Like being chosen,
Yes,
like you were to
that
carry the offering.
that's a good, yes, that's a good way
Mm,
of putting it. Exactly, like being chosen and seen again. Yeah.
yeah.
And what it felt like was the first time I kind of opened a door into things that I thought were from God, but were not.
Mm,
Initially, I would also feel a sense of warmth, tingling sensation in my body. That was when I was first introduced to a healing module, like laying on hands healing module.
mhm,
And it felt pleasant, but at the same time a little bit strange.
mm,
So I mean, when I first lay there and received the treatment, I started to laugh and even became giddy,
mm,
and then I started to cry, and then both at the same time. But it had such an impact that I was searching for more of that. So
mhm,
so I went to get a training in that module, and when I did the second module, something slightly shifted. So whereas the
mm,
first was still pleasant, after the second, it felt like something shut down,
mm,
something dampened in my spirit, and I felt a sense of disconnect.
mm,
And it was a little bit as if like a gray fog descended on
mm,
me and came between me and my perception of others and the world. And then, yeah, I just remember feeling disoriented and looking for even more answers and opening even more doors that would
mm,
lead me, which I understood in the end, away from that God that I was
mm,
looking for. Next thing, I was meeting with a channeler, so that if yeah, if
mhm,
or if anybody doesn't know what it is someone who um, contacts the spirit world and tries to convey thoughts and messages from beings there.
mm,
So when I was exposed to that, it was as if a trap snapped shut, if you like, because I was
mm,
told some stuff apparently pertaining to my destiny and my past, but it was all twisted and lies, but it had
mm.
a very strong impact on my body. So when I accepted these lies, it felt really like someone punched me in my stomach.
Ah,
And along with it came a package of guilt and heaviness. And again, I was more hooked because of those feelings, because I wanted to make amends somehow.
mhm,
And then I ended up becoming trained at this ladies' trainings course.
mm,
And so it went on.
mhm.
So one thing led after another, and the worse I felt, the more healing I sought.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
It's like an exaggerated version of starting to watch a bad movie, but staying with it because you just want to see it all resolved.
Yes.
But at a much deeper, more intense
Yes, that's a good way
level.
of putting it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you think the next corner I take, this will lead me
This will be it.
yeah, this will be it.
Yeah.
This will be the answer.
Mhm.
And yes, you get a lot of initial answers and you get a lot of highs when you go to these events and workshop conferences, you name it.
Mhm.
But then, surely enough, it soon evaporates and it leaves me feeling even more depressed.
Mm.
So I carried that a lot. And often, I would just walk around the world with downcast eyes and feeling bitter and resentful inside and suspicious and
Suspicious of
other people. And my body was often fatigued and exhausted. So after a long time, it was really decades, 2 decades actually, where it felt like chasing a cat chasing its own tail. I became suspicious about what was going on, what I believed in, because I realized you are actually not getting better. Actually, you are getting worse. And that was the first time that I started to look at what I believed differently.
Wow. Wow. I just want to affirm that just your desire to connect and cultivate that relationship with God, like that motivated you to keep going.
Yes.
And so often, we have that pure intent and motive, and we just end up finding ourselves in places we never imagined we'd be. But being able to, really have that self-compassion, like you are motivated by wanting that
Thank you, Lisa.
special, intimate connection with God.
Yeah. That was, I think that was the original motivation. And others came in, as I said, wanting to feel special or chosen, but that could also be connected back to my original feeling. And some also was motivated by wanting to compensate for feelings of unworthiness by feeling special and chosen.
Yeah. And boy, we can do weird things with that because God created us so that we would feel special and chosen. And to have that sense of, we are the apple of his eye, we're his favorite. And that is pure and good and okay.
Yes.
And somehow, we find ourselves again seeking that, but then it gets cloudy with trying to find it from other people. Yeah.
Cloudy is also a good word. I felt cloudy and confused a lot of the time. But as I said, this first encounter with him, the memory of that was something, even though it was subconscious most of the time, something that led me to compare my present experiences against that. And so there was an increasing sense of, okay, something is off. Something is out of whack. It doesn't match. It cannot be possibly the same thing.
Wow.
So that's how questions started to arise. And I just began to research.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to wrap up this part one and then find out the rest of the story. But just so going back to that experience in kindergarten, feeling chosen, feeling warm, feeling awe as you were there at the altar offering, and having it be so important that you went and did whatever you could in your own home, making your own decisions to continue that connection with God. So beautiful and just so amazing that for decades that stayed with you and it became, your compass.
Yes. My compass. That's right.
So sometimes I love to just take a pause, take a deep breath, and just go back to that favorite spot and just see if there's anything else that's important that you notice about that you want to share.
You mean that moment?
At giving the offering.
It felt like coming home. It felt like coming home to something or someone very familiar and dear.
Wow.
So in an odd way, you could say it was a sense of recognition. And I think for some reason, children do have an instinct about who God is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they when they hear the first time, they have an initial sense also of his goodness.
Mm.
And I think that played into it as well. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it was a homecoming feeling.
Ah,
Yeah.
it's so beautiful. And it just affirms, the Bible says, before the foundations of the world we were created.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
knowing, you're close, getting closer back towards your creator.
Mhm. Yes,
Wow.
yeah. Yeah.
You said 4 years old.
Yes.
So you only had a short 4 years.
Yes, if you like. But they made the difference in a way. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
they made the difference. It's, yeah, as I said, to keep seeking.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to hear the rest of the story. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Lisa.